Okay, yeah.
Well, they could. Yeah. Speakers.
And we suggested having a conversation spent over. And he said, the county said, it said, it's the last 20 years, they've been trying to get the city to deliver. The last 3 years, we've been busy with Stewart and fighting that.
Yeah, he is in.
It's the modern. It's not. It's the. I do think drinking the because she can't filter them. And wastewater in the city is.
Division type, but
Unfortunately, this city cannot. For the elections. We're still getting, fighting.
he's totally do that.
Shows some good.
I will maybe Sarah.
Yeah. They had you. Solid proof. Yeah. She's associated. I think like, yeah, they're gonna be best raise a lot. Those days.
And for base.
Faith is a lot.
They were raised for press. You didn't get to do the fun stuff this morning, transit training.
So we're just getting everything on one stop.
Replace.
We had.
I mean, I see.
They have, we don't have anything for. Sam has to leave. Residential guys. Yeah, let's do that.
And the water centers are free.
Good morning. I am not Ms. Barbara Sheen Todd, chair of this group, Vice Chair Mayor Woody Brown, City of Largo. Welcome and good morning. I'll call this meeting to order and thank you all who are attending in person. I encourage you to attend in person, even though we have brand new technology in this room. Still a little clunky to attend from far away, but we certainly appreciate all those that are here. Even if they're in the comfort of their own home or home office somewhat far away in the region. So thank you for being here. I will now ask Alana to go ahead and do our attendance.
Right, so I'm going to call your organization and you can say your name. I only need one representative from each organization, so don't feel like you have to announce every single person who's here from your organization. Just one is enough. So Audubon, Florida.
Jeff Lichty.
Friends of the Hillsborough River.
John Oving.
Sierra Club. Bay Conservancy. Bay Keeper. Tampa Bay Watch.
Tampa Bay Watch is here
Thanks, Peter.
online.
Joe Island Clams.
Present, BJ Strout.
CJ. WSP. Gulfstream Natural Gas. Okay, Tampa Bay Pilots Association.
Harry Fluke is here.
All right, Mosaic.
President Tino Provenzano.
Tampa Electric Company.
Nick Fletcher's here.
UF IFAS and Florida Sea Grant. USF College of Marine Science and Ports.
Stephen Myers.
And, Eckerd College.
Jeff Villardo.
Hillsborough Elected. Hillsborough Staff.
David Glicksberg.
David. Manatee Staff.
Alyssa Powers.
Then we have Pasco Elected.
Joel Penn.
Okay. And then Pasco Staff.
Sorry, that's Joel. Yeah, Joel Penn. Natural Resources.
Pinellas Elected. Pinellas Staff. APA. Port Tampa Bay. Port of St. Petersburg. Manatee Port Authority. St. Petersburg. Someone speak up on behalf of St. Pete. City of Tampa. City of Clearwater. Okay, and our chair is absent, and our vice chair.
I'm here, Woody Brown.
Army Corps of Engineers.
Mariah Avalera is here.
USGS. NOAA.
David Dale.
Florida Department of Environmental Protection.
Bill Wilkerson.
Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission.
Savage.
Amelia. Florida Department of Transportation. Southwest Florida Water Management District.
Viviana Bendixson online.
Thanks, Brianna. Hillsborough at-large member?
Ann Claw.
Thanks, Ann. Our Pinellas at-large member?
George Henderson.
Thanks, George. The Environmental Protection Commission of Hillsborough County?
Chris Pratt.
Thanks. The Hillsborough County City-County Planning Commission?
Sean College here.
Tampa Bay Estuary Program?
Ed Truitt.
Right. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service?
Tiffany Lane.
Dill?
Debbie Clooney.
And Tampa Bay Water.
James Jacobs.
Great, we have a quorum.
Thank you. I would encourage if you got online, after you're placed in the alphabet, just put your organization and name in the chat online so we have your participation. And then also if you're joining us as a member of the ABM online, just keep your camera on to kind of facilitate participation. At this point, I will ask if there's any public comment. Seeing none, we will close public comment and move on to approval from the March 9th, 2023 minutes from the full agency meeting. Move approval.
Second.
Any corrections or changes? All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimous. Next, we'll hear from Tampa Bay Water. They're in the process of completing their long-term master water plan, which includes additional water supply options to meet the region's demand by 2033. So I'd like to thank Warren Hogg from Tampa Bay Water for being here to present a little bit about that process.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity and the invitation to come speak to you this morning. I would like to talk for a few minutes this morning about Tampa Bay Water's long-term master water plan, blueprint for how we meet demands in the future. My name is Warren Hogg, Chief Science Officer with Tampa Bay Water, and I brought friends and technical support. With me this morning is Danielle Kiersey, Tampa Bay Water's Project Manager, Amanda Schwerman with the engineering firm Black & Beach, and Brandon Moore, our Public Affairs Manager. I'll start the talk this morning. Is this picking up? Can you all hear me? Okay. I'll start this morning by giving you a quick overview of Tampa Bay Water, who we are and what we do. Then Danielle will talk to you about our planning process, and Amanda will talk to you about how we're narrowing down the potential water supply options to get to a final list. For those of you that are unfamiliar with Tampa Bay Water, we are the region's water supplier. We are now celebrating our 25th year. Our anniversary is actually Saturday. We'll turn 25 years old. And we went from a cooperative before then. In 1998, we reformed. We were a cooperative, and we went to a true utility. Now we have the unequivocal obligation to meet our member government's demands, now and for the future. We only have 6 members that are very important to us. Those are Hillsborough, Capito, and Pinellas counties, and the cities of Tampa, St. Petersburg, and Newport Richey. Tampa Bay Water has one mission: to supply water to the members. We cannot control growth. We do not have the ability to make our members conserve more water, although they do. And we can't make any member use more reclaimed water for purple pipe or irrigation projects. What we do is supply their water demands each and every day. We do that through a very diverse network of water supply sources and infrastructure that you see listed on the map. When we reformed in 1998, our intention was to balance both meeting the region's need for drinking water and the needs of the environment. And it's a balancing act that we've worked very hard to achieve. Tampa Bay Water and the community has invested more than $2 billion in infrastructure that allows us now to operate in an environmentally sustainable manner. Water Management District has been an exceptional partner to us, and they've committed over $305 million to help us to meet our water supply and environmental restoration goals. The results are obvious. Across the northern Tampa Bay area, we've seen a full recovery from pumping impacts of lakes and wetlands around all 10 of the northern well fields. We in the district worked together to document this environmental recovery, and when we renewed our water use permit for these well fields in early 2022, the district was satisfied that we had achieved recovery, and they removed the requirement from our permits to continue those studies. Now we simply monitor to make sure we preserve what we've achieved. But the region is still growing, and with that growth comes a need to expand our water supply system. Our long-term projections of demand show that we need another 10 to 20 million gallons of water per day by the year 2023. And as we look at new water supply options, it's our goal to maintain the environmental balance that we've achieved and the recovery. We'll do that by keeping the environment at the forefront of all of our decision-making for new projects. We have no intentions of going backwards or losing any of the environmental recovery that we've achieved. And to do that, we'll have to make sure that any project that we recommend will fully meet an environmental sustainability goal and that can be operated in an environmentally sound manner. I'd now like to turn the presentation over to Danielle Kiersey to talk to you about our planning process.
Thanks, Warren. Tampa Bay Water's governing contracts require that we stay ahead of the water supply growing demands by updating our long-term master water plan every 5 years. This process typically takes about 10 years to complete and includes all 4 steps shown. It starts with the master water plan, which provides us with a short list of projects for future feasibility studies. The feasibility program includes a rigorous review and assessment to determine cost and feasibility. And those feasible projects then move forward into the water supply selection phase, where configurations of projects are developed for water supply sources. Selected project or configuration of projects then move forward for design and construction to meet future demands. And as Warren mentioned, our current process is seeking to identify at least 10 to 20 million gallons per day of new water supply by 2033. And we are looking at several projects to accomplish that. Our process starts with the universe of options, and this includes over 100 supply concepts. These ideas came from previous master water plans, Tampa Bay Water staff, our member governments, and the public. We then narrowed down that list using core screening criteria to narrow it down to about 50 options. And we've just recently reduced that list down even further to 11 options using fine screening. Moving forward, we'll be coming up with a short list, and that will be going to for future feasibilities. Our goal throughout the evaluation process is to develop a scientific and defensible process without bias to one supply source over another. Each project will be evaluated using the board-approved criteria shown, including environmental stewardship, cost, and reliability. And each water supply option will undergo the same evaluation process to determine the best option for Tampa Bay Water, its member governments, and their customers. Each of these criteria includes sub-criteria. For example, environmental stewardship includes things like environmental sustainability, permitting, and public perception. Cost includes the total cost per 1,000 gallons, capital cost, as well as operations and maintenance cost. And reliability includes reliability of the yield, regional system impacts, and any contractual requirements that we may have with other parties. Here's where we are in the process today. We're sharing the results of the fine screening evaluation. We'll refine these results even further, and we'll be taking a short list to Tampa Bay Water's board in August. The board will then consider this short list in November to select the projects for future feasibility. Stakeholder input is also an important part of the process, and we hope to use some of your feedback today to add to this as well. To date, we've convened 3 ad hoc committees, including technical water experts, environmental stakeholders, economic development stakeholders, and we've also conducted 5 focus groups. The input that we've received from these groups will be used to shape our feasibility studies so that we can collect data and hopefully address some of the concerns that we've heard. This is a brief snapshot of some of the input that we've received. So in general, known sources are more acceptable, although residents still have some concerns about each, such as environmental impacts and water quality. There's also acceptance of desalination, but stakeholders did express concerns for contaminants in the bay as well as cost. And non-technical stakeholders had strong negative reactions towards reclaimed water, with residents skeptical that the water could be cleaned enough to remove all contaminants. What we've learned across all stakeholder groups is that transparency and data are required for all sources. Residents want easy to access information, and they also want to know about the standards. They want to know what the standards are for each source. Are they the same for each source, and where does their water fall within the standard? Especially for unfamiliar sources like potable reuse, residents would prefer independent third-party confirmation or to participate in the data collection process. Lastly, we heard that environmental sustainability is important regardless of the source. And now I'll turn it over to Amanda Shorman with Black & Veatch to tell you about the sources that we're considering and the results of the fine screening evaluation.
Thank you, Danielle. So as Danielle mentioned, we've been going through a methodical process. Narrow down the universe of options, and we've narrowed it down to the top 25, which includes seawater, surface water or river water, fresh groundwater, brackish groundwater, and reclaimed water, and some out-of-the-box options that don't really fit into those categories. So these 25 options went through the fine screening process, and that's what I'll be sharing today. Each option was evaluated using the criteria Danielle mentioned and ranked highest, which was best, to lowest, which was worst. And the top 11 options were identified to move forward to the shortlist evaluation. 11 was selected because this is a breakpoint that was most obvious drop in evaluation scores. And I'll jump right into those now. On the following slides, just want to note the numbers indicate the core screening numbering system is not anything to do with the ranking. I also want to note that we are working on refining our information and evaluation, stuff like estimated yields and future analysis are still ongoing. So this slide shows the seawater and brackish water desalination projects that made it through fine screening. These include a brackish well field in central Pasco County, shown by number 2 on the map. And I also want to point out these are general locations. These are not very specific locations. In this conduct, we would withdraw water from the lower portion of the upper Floridan aquifer. Options 4 and 5 both are at the existing desalination plant in Apollo Beach. The first one would expand the desalination plant with additional seawater, and the second would expand the desalination plant with brackish groundwater blending with the existing seawater supply. Moving to the surface water options or river water options. The first one is the Northern Pinellas surface water plant, which would be a new plant and a reservoir, and it would treat excess water from the Lake Tarpon discharge canal. The next one would be a new surface water plant near the existing CW Bill Young Regional Reservoir, and it would include additional withdrawal and treatment from the Alafaya River. And then the last one includes a new surface water plant with a new reservoir in southern Hillsborough County, and we would treat water from new sources other than the Alafaya and Hillsborough rivers, such as the Little Manatee River. Next is the fresh groundwater options. Fresh groundwater is a sustainable option as more and more agricultural lands transition to developments and industrial users reduce their water use. Option 10 proposes a new well field in eastern Pasco County, which is expected to be a region of continued growth. Number 13 investigates whether large industrial users or agricultural users would be willing to transfer their existing permits to Tampa Bay Water. Number 14 looks at increasing the consolidated water use permit. And this permit is the permit Tampa Bay Water uses for its well fields. For all the well fields in Pasco, Hillsborough, and Pinellas County. We've been operating the well fields at less than 90 million gallons per day for over 20 years. And it may be possible to get another small increment of water from those well fields while still protecting the environment. And then number 16 is a new fresh groundwater well field in southern Hillsborough County, where the groundwater is made possible through aquifer recharge, such as the Hillsborough County SHARP project, or other utilities recharge and reclaimed to make the groundwater available. This is the only iteration of reclaimed water that made it through fine screening. Now, reclaimed water has been in the news a lot lately as a potential drinking water source. We've been talking about it for years. However, there's still no permitting guidelines in place in Florida. So other than the Hillsborough County well field via aquifer recharge, no reclaimed water projects made it through to the next step of the evaluation. However, Tampa Bay Water knows that reclaimed water is really important to the region's future water supplies. So we're including reuse options as developmental alternatives in the master plan. Developmental alternatives are water supply options that require more sophisticated evaluation and may require a longer-term study. So as technology advances and processes develop, the cost of these alternatives may go down and the permitting uncertainties should start to get resolved. The original 1995 master plan included 3 developmental alternatives shown on the bottom right, all of which were ultimately developed. So this is not something new. Tampa Bay Water plans to identify these project concepts, including reclaimed water from the 3 possible providers, City of Tampa, Hillsborough County, and Pinellas County. And these will undergo feasibility studies, though those studies will probably take longer than the previous ones that Danielle mentioned. This also allows time for the rules to be promulgated and for uncertainty surrounding direct and indirect potable reuse to be resolved. With that, I'll hand it back to Warren to wrap up our presentation.
Thanks, Nana. We are almost at the end of our process. This is a 5-year cycle, and we're almost at the end. We will have a short list of options next month in July. We'll present those to our board and discuss those at their August board meeting. In September, we will reconvene our ad hoc committees, and we'll also have another public outreach meeting to get feedback from the general public. We'll have our final report and our final short list of projects to recommend to our board in November of this year. And the board will, upon board approval, then we'll begin feasibility studies to continue the process to get the next water supply option online. With that, we would welcome questions. I'm not sure what the time is. If we run out of time, or if you think of questions later, please direct those to Alana, and she actually represents you on our environmental ad hoc committee, and we'll get the information back to you. Thank you very much.
Good morning. First, I want to say this discussion is probably the most important we can ever have as a region, and we don't have it enough. And that's what I'm sure of. It was interesting to see the progress that's going on. I've been watching some of the meetings y'all have been holding, so this is the closest I've seen to some of the projects on a sheet. And I was trying to understand some of that. Looked like you did some outreach to residents and got some pulses of what the community was saying. And water quality is it. I mean, they care. And it's a shame we're not doing more as a region to address a lot of those water quality issues as we're talking about surface water, brackish water. My commissioner calls me on the way here this morning and says, somebody's cutting the grass in the middle right into the road and they're blowing it right into the bay. And I'm like, that's ridiculous. You know, how are we not thinking, how are we as a community not thinking, here our residents are talking water quality, yet our policies are not in place to put those there. So I wanted to bring that up. And the only other thing I saw missing was the conservation measures, which really, I know my county's behind on. I see it in our Parks and Rec. When you go into a bathroom there, those older fixtures, you know, we really still have a lot of work to do on conservation. That is not part of that, and that's a little disappointing to me to see that. But, you know, we're gonna keep pushing, and I wanna thank you for your efforts, because I know you're trying to stay ahead. I mean, we're seeing record growth in my county, and we have to all be on the same page and really push those measures. I'm looking forward. I talked to Brandon. We're gonna get a presentation from you all to our board to see what we can do to be better on those conservation, water quality, and because it's all one water. I mean, it's all tied together. And as we're struggling to keep those water quality issues into the forefront, because it's gonna get difficult. We're gonna have to make a lot of difficult decisions here in the future, but what we do now matters. So thank you for your time.
If I may, we put together a fairly short presentation this morning. Given free rein, we would have talked to you for a day or more.
I would have loved it.
One of those aspects is conservation. We realize that we can always do better. And Tampa Bay Water has partnered with all of our local governments, all of our 6 members, and the Water Management District to create what we call Tampa Bay WaterWise. We're trying to reach out into the communities for every possible way of conserving water, indoor and outdoor, old toilet replacement, fixture replacement, smart irrigation controllers. We work directly with our members to help regional messaging on outdoor irrigation. We could do at some point a whole presentation for you on those local and regional conservation measures, because you're right, it is critical. What we can conserve means we have to develop less in the future, and that saves the region money and it saves the environment.
I had the luck in my lifetime to work with the U.S. Green Building Council, and the single most thing they taught me, the worst thing we do as a community is use clean drinking water to flush our toilets. The single worst thing, that's what they said to me. And that impacted me and carried with me for, you know, a very long time. So thank you for your work, and we're gonna really start pushing some things, and we're gonna be happy to host you in Pasco.
Thank you. I think building off of what Colleen was just mentioning, you know, the initiatives that are being pursued, it seems like it's more of a reliance on traditional sources, and rather than pushing the envelope on new technologies and advancing that conversation, do some reclaimed water, you know, that is available to the region, then could be utilized to offset our consumptive water use. So I would encourage the Tampa Bay Water to consider. I know you're doing some feasibility studies, working with some of the partners on expansion of reclaimed use and how we can integrate that into the master water plan. But, you know, I think the region has to recognize that there's a finite source of either groundwater or surface waters in our region. And if we're going to continue to go and draw back to those traditional sources, the 10 to 20 million gallons we need now is going to be 20 to 30 million gallons, you know, a couple of decades from now. It's going to be 30, 40 million gallons, you know, 3 decades from now. We have to start investing in some of these newer technologies to think about this one water concept so that we can better manage holistically both our wastewater and our drinking water supplies within the region. And if we keep on putting that out decades and decades out, you know, we're going to get ourselves back in the situation where, you know, our wetlands and surface waters are not going to be at the levels that the community expects at that point. And we're going to get back in the same conversations we had in the early 90s when Tampa Bay Water was formed. So my point is, I think now is the time to be proactive because there are a lot of resources to start doing that work. There's conversations now around some of the emerging contaminants and the new technologies to treat those emerging contaminants. And if we're not investing in them as a region, we're going to be left behind in terms of our water supplies and needs for the region 50 years out. That's all I want to say, but with that respect.
We completely agree. The developmental alternatives that Amanda discussed within the master water plan, we will continue to push those studies of reclaimed water and water quality and treatment. And as soon as we get a clear regulatory path established, those can, or technology improves or both, those can pretty quickly pop out of that alternatives box right to the forefront of water supply options. That's what happened with DSL, brackish RO back in the day. They continued to be studied, but as soon as the restrictions and the regulations were in place, they came out, they got implemented. But we are looking to do that as soon and efficiently as possible.
Thank you, Ann.
So years ago, when we were talking about the creation of the reservoirs and so forth, on the Alafaya River, and also the restriction of water coming over the dam in the Hillsborough River, and reuse even of the water coming out of the water treatment plants, one of the things that comes forward over and over again is how important it is to provide fresh water to Tampa Bay itself so that it maintains that estuary balance of fresh and salt water that's so important for the fish and the wildlife and our economic use of that resource, our fishermen and so on. So I'm sure that's one of the environmental factors that you guys continue to look at and balance, but additional use of water from the different reservoirs, we need to make sure that enough fresh water is coming into Tampa Bay to maintain the health of that ecosystem. And I just want to bring that up again. I know it's something that we talk about and everyone recognizes, and then all of a sudden people forget about that part. And that's been apparent with some of the decisions made within some of the political decisions that are made recently when we hear about not respecting the water coming over the dam and the Hillsborough River, et cetera. Very important. So thank you.
A question, you mentioned the customers and especially along reuse of reclaimed water, highly treated water. And the city of Largo is not a direct customer, but we're a customer. And we treat 20 million gallons a day at an advanced wastewater treatment plant. And we're in a position now where half of our water is being used in the reclaim system. The other half is still going out into Tampa Bay, and we're looking for a place to put that. All direction points to, everything's kind of pointing to deep well injection, because we're on a short timeline, probably much shorter than you're talking about. Consumer confidence in using treated wastewater as potable water. In the future, are you considering those wastewater plants as well? Or you're just looking at Pinellas County wastewater plants here in this county?
Through our member governments, we are looking at not only their sources of reclaimed water, but consecutive users as well. It's all of our water as a region, so we don't want to look at it in its compartments. So we would certainly look at any available reclaimed water that we could harvest into a future project. When the timing is right and the technology and the regulations are in place, we're not going to focus only on our direct members.
Thank you. I just want to say that I certainly understand the benefits and our goal is to eliminate any surface water discharge from our city. I'm not completely sold on deep well injection because water is finite, right? So if we put it far, far away, I think it's going to affect the system in ways that we don't fully understand yet. It'd be like shipping it out into the outer space, if you will. So it's a long conversation, but right now we need to do something. Any other questions? Questions online? Oh, please, Steve.
So this is kind of related to some of the other questions that came up. As you're doing these very long-term projections out decades, so saltwater intrusion is something that's going to become increasingly a problem. How much do you take that into account in your modeling?
Very much. We experience saltwater intrusion around 2 of the northern well fields, Northwest Hillsborough and Eldridge Wild, through time. That has been addressed so far with the reduction in pumping from those well fields. We've seen a stabilization. Actually, at Eldridge Wild, the saltwater front has moved back towards Tampa Bay. So we understand that correlation of pumping to reduce water levels to saltwater intrusion. Those models and those studies will continue to be performed as part of any new studies. We at Tampa Bay Water, another aspect of the work we do is climate change research to understand how the changing climate, sea level rise, precipitation patterns will affect our current and future sources. If the distribution of rainfall changes, what does that mean to the flow in the rivers in the summertime? Can we count on that? Will it be more or less? So we will continue to look at not only saltwater intrusion, but sea level rise and other climate change factors in these and existing sources.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Warren, Danielle, Amanda, for the information. I'm sure that we could talk for several more hours as well, but we appreciate the presentation and look forward to the progress. Next, we will invite FWC is exploring changes to fishing regulations at the Skyway Fishing Pier to address the recurring entanglement of birds, brown pelicans, and others in fishing lines and fishing equipment. So I'd like to thank Jeff Lichty from Audubon, Florida, to present the proposed rule changes.
All right, so my name is Jeff Lichty with Audubon, Florida. I'm a coastal biologist with Audubon, Florida. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share with you about seabird entanglement at Skyway Fishing Pier this morning. I'm going to give a little bit of a background on the situation, and then turn it over to Becky Schneider with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission to talk more specifically about the rule proposal that they are in the midst of working on. Okay, so the Skyway Fishing Pier is located at the mouth of Tampa Bay. It is the basis of the old Skyway Bridge. The span was converted into a fishing pier. There's one on the north and one on the south sides. So that's in this visual, the red is the fishing piers, and you can see it sort of parallels the current Skyway Bridge. So between the north and the south spans, it's over 2 miles in combined lengths. The yellow stars on this map represent important water bird roosting and nesting colonies that surround the fishing pier. So the structure itself, as it is, the old bridge, is owned by DOT, and it is leased to DEP and operated as a state park. There is on-pier operations that are managed by a concessionaire. It's important to note that this is a pier where you can actually drive out onto, it's a long pier, so it does provide accessibility to anglers that a lot of piers don't. Unfortunately, the pier is a hotspot for seabird entanglement. We get a variety of seabirds that are entangled, and it's primarily brown pelicans that we see entangled at the pier, but there are a variety of different species. This pier has a different scale of entanglement than we see at a lot of other piers. So entanglement is an issue, around the state. The size and potentially the configuration of this pier make the problem at this one pier, quite a bit larger than it is at other sites. To give us an idea of the scale of the problem, we have reports over the last 2 years that more than 3,300 seabirds have been rescued at Skyway Pier, and over 1,000 of those have been sent to local wildlife rehabilitators requiring veterinary treatment. Additionally, there are, untold hundreds of pelicans that aren't rescued and end up dying. When birds leave the Skyway Pier, unfortunately, they'll have that line trailing behind them. They return to these nesting colonies that were shown on the map. These roosting and nesting colonies, they'll perch in the mangroves, and that line can easily become entangled, and the birds are basically tethered there and will die. Unfortunately, the damage doesn't always stop there. This bird is an adult during breeding season, so the eggs or chicks are also going to be lost with that death. And the line will stay in those colonies. So these are busy colonies where we have up to a dozen species nesting in these locations, including state-threatened wading birds like roseate spoonbills, reddish egrets, tricolored herons, little blue herons. And we do see secondary entanglements. That line will stay in the colony long after that bird that brings it back to the colony has died. And Audubon partners with Tampa Bay Watch to conduct annual monofilament cleanups at these important sites each fall. And we can say that these islands accumulate 12,000 feet of line each year. So the problem at the Skyway Pier is one that we've been aware of for a long time. Formal efforts began in 2013. A group of folks from Audubon, Florida, local Audubon chapters, FWC, DEP, pier concessionaires, rescuers, rehabbers came together to try and work out how this problem can be addressed. So over those, over the last decade, a lot of things have been implemented, and the group has worked on educational outreach, putting signage on the pier, producing materials. For those of you in the room, by the sign-in, there are some examples of the materials that have been produced. Brochures, videos, one-on-one on-pier education with anglers. Additionally, some improvements to the pier have been made to try and reduce the threat. Installing monofilament tubes to properly discard, used line, controlling the trash receptacles, and reducing the feeding hotspots that were created by the fish cleaning stations that were on the piers. All the while, rescue and rehabilitation have been ongoing during this time as well. So much of this work has been done by volunteers. It's been driven by a lot of volunteer work and nonprofit organizations. And all of this work is important and needs to continue. But as you can see from the scale of the problem in recent years, we haven't made sufficient progress in resolving the conflict. So one recent thing that Audubon has started is a pelican banding project. So these birds that are rescued and able to be released, we started banding these birds to determine the survival rates and re-entanglement of those rescued pelicans. So this project just launched in the fall of 2022. So we don't have anything to report on it thus far, but you can see here's an example. We have a metal band on the one leg and a field readable unique alphanumeric band on the other. So this individual can be wherever it shows up after release. We can follow its fate in that way. We're working with the wildlife rehabilitator groups, Seaside Seabird Sanctuary and Save Our Seabirds on this project. So that's the basic background. Now I'll hand it over to Becky to talk about FWC's work on a proposed rule for this time of year.
Good morning, everyone. Like Jeff said, my name is Becky Schneider. I am the regional biologist in FWC's Division of Habitat and Species Conservation. Really appreciate you having me here, and thank you especially to Jeff for inviting me to co-present on this topic. So FWC has been aware of the conservation challenges of seabird entanglement locally and throughout the state for a long time. We have several longstanding programs that lessen entanglement of Florida's seabirds, and the agency is working with partners like Audubon to ensure visitors to Skyway Pier in particular are aware of those available resources. Programs include things like the monofilament recovery and recycling program. As Jeff referenced, those tubes are installed on the pier. The Reel Remove Release campaign, or also known as Don't Cut the Line, as well as an interactive seabird rehabilitator app that allows folks to identify nearby rehabilitation facilities for injured birds that they may encounter. Since 2021, many of these efforts have been coordinated through the Hooked Pelican Working Group. I've actually presented to this audience on the Hooked Pelican Working Group at its inception. Participants of that group include representatives from recreational fishing clubs, fishing and wildlife organizations, wildlife rehabilitators and rescuers, local, state, and federal agencies, etc. FWC and the working group are consistently operating to update educational resources and improve messaging so it reaches a variety of audiences. There are also efforts to identify research and data needs. For example, the banding study that Jeff introduced you to is a really important information need to address. In addition, we will aim to develop new strategies that can address issues of entanglement at Skyway Pier and throughout the state. And the FWC comprised steering committee of the working group at the moment is focused, of course, on the regulatory nexus of this conservation challenge, and that's what I'll be presenting on going forward. So since early 2021, FWC has undertaken extensive stakeholder engagement to identify solution and build support for actions, including fishing regulations and others that could address this angler seabird these angler-seabird interactions at the pier. The Hook Pelican Working Group has held 3 meetings since its establishment, and those meetings have been attended by between 30 and 50 participants each. FWC has had 2 virtual public workshops to gather input on potential fishing regulations to reduce entanglements, one in November 2022 and the other in January 2023. I should actually add, we've had a 3rd public workshop in late May. Each workshop was attended by over 100 people, and a recorded version of those workshops of the November workshop in particular, has received 400 views on FWC's saltwater fishing YouTube page. So lots of engagement from the local community and likely the statewide community. A letter from the FWC Commission Chairman Rodney Barreto was sent to over 300,000 recipients. That letter encouraged all stakeholders to productively engage on the issue as the Commission works to develop potential regulatory measures. FWC staff also held a focus group meeting and consensus building workshop with invited Skyway Pier stakeholders representing conservation organizations, anglers, state park staff, government officials, and other rescue volunteers to discuss rule options, make an attempt to build consensus, and obtain feedback on proposed options. Recently, staff has met with small groups of stakeholders independently to gather more focused input ahead of forming a final rule proposal. And since November 2022, FWC has received over 500 comments through various methods, including email, phone calls, and the Saltwater Comments webpage. Stakeholder feedback informed the proposed rule package that staff ultimately presented at the February 2023 commission meeting, FWC commission meeting in Jacksonville. So that the proposed rule, we were invited to bring in a two-stop process, which essentially means that the meeting in February was the meeting to introduce our regulatory options and get support from the commissioners. The proposal presented to the commissioners included for those fishing on Skyway Fishing Pier State Park, we would establish an annual education requirement, prohibit the use of hook and line gear with more than one hook attached. So these would be things like sabiki rigs, chicken rigs, and topwater plug lures, as well as the use of any multiple hooks, so like a treble hook. That prohibition would be November through March each year. Also in the proposal was limiting anglers fishing within the park to the use of no more than 2 sets of hook and line gear, to prohibit the use of sabiki rigs within a year-round within a portion of Skyway Pier, so a no sabiki zone, and finally a proposed requirement for FWC staff to return to the commission with an update and recommendations for potential future action 2 years after the rule were to be implemented. Staff also recommended monitoring the effectiveness of the rules within an adaptive management framework. And what that means is that we would be consistently evaluating the rule for and make adjustments as necessary based on its effectiveness. Following public comment and discussion, the commission approved the proposed rules to modify fishing regulations and at Skyway Pier, but also directed staff to consider additional options and to refine our proposal prior to the final rule hearing, which is coming in July. To reduce the likelihood and severity of fishing gear entanglement, staff are gathering feedback on potential final rule options at this moment, final rule options for fishing regulations at Skyway Pier. These final rule options are intended to minimize harm to brown pelicans, reduce the need for birds to be transported to rehabilitation facilities offsite for veterinary care, and to alleviate conflict between anglers and pelicans at Skyway Pier. Of course, no one intends to catch a pelican. It's not an enjoyable experience for anyone. Most recently, FWC staff continued to gather public feedback during a virtual public workshop on the various proposed rule elements, including the establishment of an annual education requirement, the limit of the use of no more than 2 sets of hook and line gear, fishing gear restrictions, and a requirement for staff to review the regulations 2 years following implementation. From a non-regulatory perspective, staff are also exploring funding and donation opportunities for seabird rescue at Skyway Fishing Pier. Across stakeholder groups, there has been generally more support for education requirements, which obviously we concur is some of the most fundamental part of conservation. There's also general support for limits on the number of allowed hook and line gear sets, and the need for monitoring and review of the regulations. There has been larger disagreement about what the gear restrictions should be that we implement. And on the following slides, I'm going to review a variety of options that staff considered based on commissioner direction and public feedback in order to refine the restrictions prior to the final rule hearing. While these slides are primarily focused on updates to the proposed rule, gear restrictions, staff are interested in hearing feedback from anyone on any other proposed rule elements. Okay, so from information gathered during stakeholder meetings and the public workshop, FWC staff narrowed down these 2 options for consideration and feedback. Option 1 would prohibit the use of hook and line gear with more than 1 hook, such as sabiki rigs, chicken rigs, and topwater plugs, and multiple hooks, treble hooks, at a time bound, so from dawn to 12 p.m. and year-round. Staff proposal of gear restrictions between dawn to 12 p.m. aid to find middle ground that would reduce the likelihood of entanglement during the time periods where entangled and dead birds are observed, but also allow for fishing to continue during daytime hours when most fishing activity occurs. The reason that pelicans are most likely to become entangled in the morning hours is because that's their feeding period. Implementing time of day restrictions year-round could provide protections during both the winter and the spring, but also throughout the pelican nesting season. As Jeff pointed out, there are substantial impacts to adult breeding birds during that time. Option 2 would prohibit the same gear types as mentioned in option 1, but this would be a seasonal prohibition from November through mid-March or end of February. The options aim to reduce entanglement based on rescue efforts that indicate that winter and spring entanglement rescues are significantly higher than at other times of year. So this would be a 24-hour prohibition on those gear types during the proposed month. The proposed gear types for seasonal or time of day restrictions these gear can cause more severe injury to pelicans and other seabirds, as well as lead to more complicated rescues. So and that would increase the likelihood that the bird would need treatment at a wildlife rehabilitation center and would not be able to fly free after being released. While it's difficult to specify specifically quantify the conservation value of these options, staff believe that either option would reduce severe entanglements that are commonly seen with the use of these gear rigs, while allowing for the tradition of fishing to continue at Skyway Pier. Additionally, considering either time of day or seasonal restrictions could provide a more tailored approach to reducing entanglement and minimize regulatory complexity, since Skyway Pier is visited by patrons with diverse backgrounds, diverse languages, and experiences with fishing. So there are a lot of points to consider when deciding to implement fishing regulations at Skyway Pier. This is a very complex challenge. Education is and will continue to be the most important tool in the toolbox for addressing the issue. The mandatory educational component, created with input by anglers and wildlife conservation groups, would ensure a greater level of awareness and include training on entanglement prevention for all who come to fish at the Skyway Pier. Seasonal or time of day restrictions would reduce severe entanglements that are commonly associated with fishing routes that have more than 1 hook and multiple hooks when in use at Skyway Pier by anglers. but when the use of the pier by anglers and pelicans is at its highest in those cooler weather seasons. Pelican hooking by gear rigged with multiple single hook or multiple hooks often lead to the immobilization of the bird's extremities when they're pinned down or making it impossible for the bird to fly or forage. So these things like sabiki rigs are, in addition, things like sabiki rigs are often constructed with light line test and branch lines. That light line will break very easily when a large bird like a pelican becomes hooked and lead to those secondary entanglements like the image Jeff showed. Most often, entanglements of seabirds by sabiki rigs occur when the gear is being cast into or retrieved from the water, not necessarily when it's being actively fished, and that's an important point to make as well. Additionally, unattended fishing gear can increase the likelihood of severe entanglement and injury if the bird cannot be rescued quickly. These severe entanglements involving multiple hooks are generally too challenging for anglers to handle alone. They require the need of a bird rescuer who is not always on site. They require a swift response and experienced attention, which can be difficult to receive given the length of, especially the south pier, but either pier. Limiting anglers to no more than 2 sets of hook and line gear would reduce the amount of live fishing line that pelicans must avoid while they themselves are foraging at the Skyway Pier, thereby reducing the likelihood of entanglement. These potential rule options may also help reduce the frequency of broken line, which can often be brought back to the roosting area and entangle additional birds. Lastly, the 2 gear restriction options presented attempt to strike a balance between addressing entanglement, continuing to allow fishing access, and minimizing the regulatory complexity. FWC staff have been actively working to find a balance between supporting popular recreational fishing activity and reducing severe entanglement and harm to pelicans by other seabirds at Skyway Fishing Pier. The Skyway Pier is a location with unique features that provides fishing opportunities for both people and pelicans alike, creating a high likelihood of these interactions continuing to occur. The number of entanglements that occur at Skyway are significantly higher than at other sites, as Jeff alluded to, and therefore we believe regulatory action for this site is necessary to reduce severe entanglements that cause harm to wildlife. Potential gear restrictions would also reduce the frequency of harm coming to wildlife and will alleviate those difficult rescues, decreasing the burden presented to both recreational anglers and the wildlife rescuers who are out there. I can't say it enough, continued outreach and education efforts remain paramount in addressing this issue. Staff will always continue to work to extend productive coordination between partners that are invested in addressing this challenge and stakeholders who intersect with Skyway Pier. This partnership and this coordination is vital to our future success. And moving forward, any regulatory actions in response to this issue will again be implemented within adaptive management frameworks so that the effectiveness can be evaluated concurrently with the implementation of the rule. And that brings us to the end, and I think if there is time for questions, Jeff or I are happy to answer.
Thank you, Becky. Start in the back.
A couple quick questions. I'm a little confused. I don't know if it was clear, but multiple hooks, are they disproportionately causing the entanglement, or is the consequences of the multiple hooks more severe? I mean, what's the rationale for the multiple hooks?
Yeah,
Or both?
exactly. Thank you for honing in on that. The multiple hooks cause more severe injury, more challenging responses, and when there's multiple hooks, the bird is more likely to need veterinary attention off-site. In a live line entanglement with a single hook, in most cases, the bird can fly free. An angler can rescue the bird as a good Samaritan on his or her own without a lot of specialty equipment.
So it's not disproportionately more, it's just the consequences are more. But you also mentioned, did you go with a proposed restriction on people having more than one rig, or?
Yes, yeah, so.
But that could be single hook.
Yes, so the proposed restriction would be to have 2 sets of gear rigged and ready for, in use. And that, the intent behind that part of the proposal is that there would be fewer live lines extended into the bay that pelicans would have to navigate around. Thus, would.
Do we have data to support that that's an issue?
Yeah, the stakeholder feedback that we have is, does present both the hooks as a challenge for the severity of the injury, but also the presence of the line as a challenge for the entanglement to happen in the first place.
Thank you. And just lastly, the education component, how does that work? Who are we educating and what's the means?
Yeah, so the proposal for the education requirement at this time would be similar to our shore-based shark fishing educational requirement, which basically expects that any angler in this case that is using Skyway Fishing Pier would have to take an online educational course in order to be compliant with this proposed rule. That course would give them basic information about the bird entanglements, how it can be avoided, and how to respond to it if it happens.
So if someone shows up at the fishing pier but wasn't aware of this education requirement, how do they handle that?
Yeah, we're troubleshooting that still. We will have paper materials available. And if, as I've said many times in the presentation, the education is the fundamental value of the learning about the issues of value of that educational component. It's more important that anglers take the education rather than just try to be in compliance with the rule.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.
You mentioned online presentations. Where can these be found, and can we distribute these, for instance, Sierra Club, Friends of the River, amongst our members?
Yeah, sure. So all of our public workshops are archived on our FWC Saltwater Fishing YouTube page. So those are available. I know the November and January public workshops are certainly available. The May workshop may not be posted yet, but it will be available.
I had a couple questions. There was Sabiki Free Zone mentioned at some point. How is that determined where it's going to be, and what's the purpose of having an area that can't have Sabiki year round?
Sure, yeah. So to be clear, that's not part of what we're going to bring forward to the commission in July. The proposal in February included a Sabiki free area at the terminal end of the South Pier, and that was modeled after the no fishing zones that are implemented at the Fort DeSoto Pier and also on the Naples Pier. And those no fishing areas have proven to be effective to reduce entanglements.
The there's a current restriction on lines, is that correct? No more than 3?
Yes, there's a DEP state park rule for no more than 3 rods. So we're proposing that we implement into FWC rule, which is a different chapter in the Florida Administrative Code, limit of 2 rods.
This is less of a question probably, but maybe a question. Have you considered the enforcement challenges with option 1 versus option 2? You know, somebody has a Sabiki rod, I'm just waiting till 12:01.
Yeah, we do recognize that regulatory complexity is not in anyone's favor, and that's why we kind of honed in option 1 versus option 2 to either pursue a time of day restriction or a seasonal restriction. There was an option on the table during some stakeholder engagements in which it would be a daytime and seasonal restriction, which obviously would be quite confusing, especially for folks who are, say, tourists who are coming to fish up here.
I'd like to just say I'm a fisherman. I also spent some time as an avian biologist at what was Suncoast Seabird Sanctuary, taking care of these birds and getting them ready to go back out in the wild. And I think that the calendar restriction makes more sense. As a fisherman, you're going to get there. I guess if you get there right at dawn, you're out of luck for getting bait, right? So if you're going to fish with live bait that day, and year round, if it's a time of day thing, you're probably going to likely just break the rule until somebody tells you not to. And the last question is, what's the plans for signage on the pier? as far as whatever is determined?
Sure, yeah. So I recently actually received a critical wildlife tie grant from the Fish and Wildlife Foundation of Florida to improve our signage and deploy rescue equipment, kind of like I'm thinking of them kind of like those bike repair stations that you see on trails, so that there would be large hoop nets and pliers and other equipment available at strategic locations along the pier, so that anyone who may have otherwise come unprepared for the possibility of encountering a pelican will have the tools that they can use to rescue that bird safely. And that grant will support the equipment, will support educational material as well. And we're currently working on, in particular, improving our accessibility of signage for non-English speakers.
Thank you.
Yeah, I want to commend you all, first of all, for the level of stakeholder involvement that you guys have been doing over the past couple of months to educate on this topic. And I think my main question is centered around the rules will be just to the pier proper, right? The overland portions of the pier, not the causeway approaches.
Exactly, yeah, it's within the boundaries of the state park.
So given the armoring that's being proposed with a lot of wads and other potential bird and fish and fishermen attractants along the causeways, do you think there's potential just shift some of those potential entanglements further south away from the pier? Has that been a consideration in the discussions with stakeholders, and how you might address that if those interactions are just shifted to where we're putting a lot of infrastructure and wad debris that creates new bird perching habitat?
Sure, yeah, that's a good consideration. We are honing in on Skyway because it's known to be an entanglement hotspot. If these rules, or any portion of these rules are effective in what we're trying to achieve, then it's very likely that we could see either that dispersal of the issue outside of the area of Skyway, or other challenges that might arise. So that's part of working within the adaptive management framework as well.
Does the state park extend past the pier itself along the causeway? Or is that DOT easement at that point?
For our purposes, the state park starts at the place at which a visitor would pay admission.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I would just like to congratulate the Wildlife Commission and its staff for working so hard to reach out to the community. This has developed into a bit of a contentious situation, and you folks are handling it with extreme diplomacy, and but it's just really, really important that staying on target and doing everything we can to reduce the impacts on not just pelicans, but the other birds out there is just really important. I want to thank you and your staff for your hard work on this.
Thanks, and of course, our success really relies on support from our partners like Alpine Florida, like the Ornithological Society, and I appreciate it.
Thank you, Ann. I think Justin Tramble from Tampa Bay Waterkeeper has a question online. You there, Justin?
Yeah, I think Rebecca answered it. It was just on the intentionality behind multiple languages in the content that's going to be created for both education and, if there are training requirements. But it sounds like you guys have taken that into consideration, so thank you.
Yeah, reportedly there's over a dozen languages spoken on the Skyway Pier, so it's a difficult audience to reach.
Thank you. I just had one more question, curiosity question. We talked a lot about eastern brown pelicans. What's the second most frequently entangled bird at the pier?
Other commonly
I'm not going to hold you to this if you got it.
Other seabirds that we see that are commonly entangled would be cormorants, common loons in the wintertime when they're here. Reddy turnstones, I think, are often entangled, not necessarily from food fishing line, but from fishing line debris. Any others, Jeff?
Royal terns.
Royal tern.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Keep up the good work. Next, we will have a, staff has been working with the Army, the staff of the Army Corps of Engineers have joined to present us on the recently published Gulf of Mexico National Shoreline Management Study Report, which assesses the regional causes and effects of erosion and accreditation. Red print is hard to read without my reading glasses. I apologize. That's all right. Social, cultural, economic, and environmental importance of our shorelines and current and future risks. The report at this presentation are timely since the ABM's meeting in September will feature a presentation by FDOT on erosion issues along the Bay Bridges and the proposed solutions. So please welcome Mariah, James Hutchison, and Denise Reed from the Army Corps of Engineers.
Hi, and good morning. I'm gonna share my screen here. It'll allow me to. Okay, hopefully you all can see this. I'll put it in.
We can.
Okay, great. So again, I'm Mariah Avalera, and I'm joined by Dr. Denise Reed, our technical lead for the National Shoreline Management Study Assessments. And today we're going to be presenting on the Gulf of Mexico Regional Assessment Report. And I'll provide a brief background, and then we'll get into the details of the report itself. The authority that we're working under is directing us to look at the economic, environmental, and social impacts of erosion and accretion. And based on our findings, develop recommendations for federal and non-federal participation and use of a systems approach for coastal risk management. And so to date, we've completed 8 regional assessments, which you can see here on the map. And these reports can be found on our National Shoreline Management Study website. And I will also show the website at the end of our presentation, so if you don't have a chance to copy it down now. We're in the process of developing 2 additional regional reports. We have one for Puerto Rico and US Virgin Islands, and then we'll be moving into the Pacific territories and Commonwealths. And we're also preparing to send a national assessment report to Congress, which will focus on the areas within the authority on a national scale. So each of our regional assessment reports are technical in nature and addressing information that we've identified in the authority. And one of the most important elements of our reports is that each of our assessments, we implemented an informative engagement process. And so we've held engagement workshops with experts across the field in each of our regions and again on that national scale. And our engagement workshops helped to fill data gaps, identify existing information, capture current events through case studies, and most importantly, to develop and refine our recommendations. And in that engagement process, we had extensive reviews and a lot of exchange between our external interests to capture a more comprehensive report with a multi-voice perspective. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Denise Reed to get into the details of the report.
Great, thanks very much, Mariah. I'm hoping you can hear me in the room. Let me know if not.
We can.
Thank you. So this is really quite a detailed and extensive report. It's about 200 pages plus appendices. And so I'm really just going to try to give you a flavor of what's in it today, and we'll say a little bit about the recommendations that are in it. It's a very large area. Our Gulf of Mexico area went from Brownsville, Texas, I believe, to Collier County in Florida. We didn't have the whole of the Florida shoreline. The lower part of the Gulf of Mexico coast and around the Atlantic coast was considered in the South Atlantic report. But in general, across all of the regional reports, we did cover all of Florida. So one of the things that we wanted to do within these regional assessments was really kind of highlight the issues that are particular to the area. Obviously, there's a lot of general coastal dynamics about how sand moves and how waves operate on beaches and how wetlands work, which is fairly common in terms of the process dynamics across the whole country. And so there is some of that to provide a little bit of context. But I think for the for the Gulf, we tried to highlight a few things that were a little bit different in terms of the process regime. And so just a couple here, you know, the loop current, something that probably at the coast, you think, okay, it's an oceanographic phenomena and, you know, it may not make that much difference, but clearly, you know, we've got some evidence that this can cause increased water levels, changes in temperature, and all of those kinds of things that can have effects around the Gulf shoreline, something that we have to deal with in the Gulf of Mexico, nothing we can really manage. And then obviously the big one probably for us, and as well as parts of the Atlantic coast, is the impact of hurricanes. And I do want to say that this report was put together and completed before the devastating effects of Hurricane Ian on the Florida coast. And so we don't have any details of that particular storm in here. And really we don't, because we're trying to cover the whole of the Gulf of Mexico and trying to cover lots of issues, we don't really go into any particular issue in a lot of detail. We're really trying to give the audience a kind of broad flavor of the Gulf of Mexico shoreline and how it works. So if you go to the next slide, Mariah. No, this is National Shoreline Management Study. Our focus is on shoreline management, erosion and accretion, as Mariah pointed to in the original authority, and then shoreline management in terms of what we can do about it. Another important point about these regional assessments, in fact, the whole National Shoreline Management Study, is we did not go out and collect new data. We really were trying to use the information that was already available. And so as we worked with stakeholders through this, they were supplying us with data and information either that we could use in case studies about particular areas or that were state specific, and we tried to highlight that. In general, we did try to utilize, again, this was an approach that we applied across all of the regional reports, national level data sets, so that we could say something about the system all the way from Brownsville to Collier County. And clearly there's not a lot of data in much detail that does that. And so on the right here, you see a USGS shoreline change data. And so we do talk to that. But we also try to bring out particular areas and different types of change that are occurring. And so I put in a few photos here. There's 200 pages of words. I'm just going to use a few photos here this morning to illustrate some of the points we make. Obviously, beach erosion is really important. But I do want to say, particularly given your area of interest, that one of the things that was highlighted, not just in Florida, but across the Gulf Coast, was the lack of attention to interior bay shorelines. And I think this came out in other regions too. And so the idea, we'll talk about the recommendations at the end here, but the idea that we have some data about the open coast, but really when we think about shorelines, and this is something we're trying to emphasize with everybody we talk to about the National Shoreline Management Study, it is not just about the open ocean coast. It's really also needs to be about the interior bays and the estuaries and what's going on those shorelines and how little information, very patchy information we have about those. Next slide, please, Mariah. So having said that about kind of shoreline change and the lack of data and thinking about the actual coast as that kind of margin between land and water, I think that what we really wanted to do in these reports, although the congressional mission was to look at that, we wanted to set that in context. Why is the shoreline, either the open coast or the interior bays, why is that important? Why is that something that deserves attention? And really, it's because of its importance to the economy, its importance to people, and it's important to ecosystems, environment, and the kinds of issues that many of us are very concerned about. And so throughout the regional reports, and obviously in the Gulf report too, as well as in the national report, we've really tried to highlight and focus on the importance of coastal systems beyond just erosion rates. And so, you know, I just pulled out a couple of examples here. We use throughout the reports statistics that are available to us. This is for the ocean sector, which is, you know, the coastal economy is all the coastal counties. The ocean economy is a subset of that. directly related to ocean activity. And we can see here clearly across the whole Gulf of Mexico, the importance of tourism, recreation on the right, but also marine transportation, offshore minerals, obviously perhaps not in Florida, but in other parts of the Gulf of Mexico as really important. And we have some really key ports. You know, you in Tampa is a really, really important port for the nation, for the region. And even though I've got New Orleans here as one closer to home, I'm speaking to you from Louisiana today. These are important systems. Those of us who live on the coast kind of understand that. This is a message we're trying to get across to others who may not. Next slide. This is an illustration of, again, the way we try to use data sets that depicted the whole of the Gulf of Mexico while allowing us to highlight some important regional differences. And so population on the top left and employment on the bottom left. And so you can see here, no surprise to you in Florida, very highly populated areas along the central and southwest Florida coastline there, again over in Texas, lots of differences. So this means that there are different needs or different interests across the Gulf, and the ocean employment varies, but is also important. Unfortunately, on the graph on the lower left, you see that Galveston Bay employment kind of tends to dominate the color scale there. But there are really, people work in these systems. People live and they work here. This is not just about recreation. They're important. And then a point which I know you're very familiar with, one again that we wanted to make is the idea that these people who live on the coast, they own property. And notwithstanding storms, we're not talking about storms here, which can often be on the top of our personal radar screens. Sea level rise is coming. And sea level rise was one of the things we really wanted to kind of keep as a theme within the National Shoreline Management report. And you've probably seen these kinds of diagrams on the right here, but this is the property value at risk with 1 foot, 3 foot, and 6 foot at the bottom of sea level rise. And so I see a comment in the chat. The report is already available, and Mariah's got a link at the end of the presentation about it. So you can see here issues that are not news to you, probably not news, hopefully, to the people that I live and work with in Louisiana, but things that we really need to draw attention to at a national scale. So next slide. And I have not included everything in here today because I know we don't have a lot of time, but we also do a similar kind of highlight on different kinds of ecosystems across the Gulf of Mexico. So again, it's not just sandy beaches. We're talking about mangroves, we're talking about marshes, we're talking about seagrasses, and the kinds of things that actually support many of those activities that we just discussed. We do use case studies throughout the report to highlight different issues. There's just a couple here of things that we highlighted in Florida. We had a kind of deep dive on erosion and accretion issues and dynamics and consequences and management approaches, one in each state, and the one Cape San Blas was the area that we spent a few pages thinking about in Florida, but really kind of trying to use case studies here at Egmont Key just to highlight the way in which erosion, something that we think of as, some people might think of as just something that changes the width of the beach. We have around this shoreline really important cultural resources which are at risk and which require protection if we're not going to lose our cultural heritage. And that's a message that comes out very, very clearly in many, many other regional reports and indeed in the national report. So that gives you a flavor for the kind of content that we have. We have the erosion rates, we have this kind of emphasis on why is the coast important and what is going on in general, but also what is going on in specific areas. So next slide, Mariah. We have had to pull out in a number of, which is very difficult for something as large as the Gulf of Mexico. We've had to pull out a few regional highlights as we kind of try to communicate this report in its depth and detail to many, many other audiences. And so these are a few that we've used in other places. Hurricanes and sea level rise, serious threats. You all know that. Another theme that came out very, very clearly, sediment of all types is a valued resource. We'll come back to that when we talk about recommendations in a bit. We had great stakeholder participation. This was conducted during COVID, everything was virtual, but we had great participation from people on webinars of several hours. People followed up with information. They gave us data afterwards or information reports that we were looking for. And there's a lot of very established collaboration in the Gulf of Mexico. There are several Gulf-wide venues where scientists, agencies, managers, people with coastal interests come together. And these are really something that can be leveraged to move forward. We don't have to build that from scratch. Sometimes we have it for somewhat unfortunate circumstances like the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. But the Gulf of Mexico Alliance, for instance, has been very successful in bringing people together about issues for a number of years. And then the last one here, and this is something I think that there's a lot of interest across the Gulf, and it's maybe more appropriate here in the Gulf of Mexico than in some other coastal systems, the idea that nature-based solutions are a real opportunity that we need to be taking advantage of. So again, really high-level discussion, but those are some of the things we think that come out of the report. We were tasked with coming up with recommendations. And again, so really all these diverse issues, lots of different stakeholders in the discussion. And next slide, Mariah. And I think it's really quite remarkable given the diversity of the issues, the diversity of the shoreline, from very built up to almost wilderness areas in many areas, high salinity salt flats to mangrove swamps to broad wide tourist beaches. Given the diversity of different coastal systems and shoreline types that we see across the Gulf of Mexico, we converged really quite well on these three topics for recommendations. The report actually includes a series of lessons learned, outstanding issues and challenges. And at the end of each chapter, we try to capture something on the different topics. But we have a lot of recommendations that we're not going to go into today, but they've been packaged so that there's a high level recommendation and then some more detail underneath that. And these are the three that kind of rose to the top. So we're just going to quickly talk about them, not in a whole lot of detail. Could you go to the next one, Mariah? So sediment management. Well, we need sediment of all types, and the idea of that key finding just now, that regional highlight, that sediment of all types is really valuable. No, it's not just clean, white, high quality sand for beach nourishment in tourist areas. It's all kinds of sediment as being a valued resource. That comes out very, very clearly in the report. But the recommendation here is to be much more coordinated, efficient, and effective and adaptable in how we use those sediment resources, because they're value and can really help us to mitigate the adverse effects of what's going on along our shorelines in terms of erosion and accretion, including, to the extent that we can, manage the impacts of sea level rise, but also support economies through tourism and ecosystems through wetland restoration. So under each of these fairly broad recommendations that you see there, we have a number of example actions. And when we get to the example action level, we try to say, well, who would be involved in carrying out those actions? Because obviously for something as big as this, it's going to take a lot of people, and there are lots of different facets to it. So dredge material management plans is the example action that we've got highlighted here, which is basically really about aligning the excavation with the need for placement. And the idea of sediment banking keeps coming up. It has some regulatory hurdles. Folks from regulatory agencies were involved in this. It's something that a lot of people are interested in. That sediment is available, it's being dredged, and I'm not quite ready for it yet. And so it gets used in a less than optimal sense, or heaven forbid, it gets put in an offshore disposal site or something like that. And so there is some experience of this. So lots of different aspects of sediment management are highlighted and how we can do it better and how we can do it in a more coordinated way that is really all about appreciating the value of sediment and how important it is for the Gulf Coast. The next recommendation is mapping erosion hazard areas. And this is really the recognition that we have a lot of data, but we don't have consistent, high quality, relevant data about different kinds of shoreline characteristics and the processes that cause a shoreline change. And we need this, if we're really going to help coastal communities plan for the future and plan for the change that's coming, we've really got to have better information. Now, obviously, better information on how things work now and better information on change that has already happened may or may not help somebody directly in terms of thinking about what the future holds. But the technical community, they need that data in order that they can put models together and provide decision support tools for coastal communities that are facing change. And one of the things that comes out very clearly here is, again, the point that I made earlier, that where we have data and reasonable data, a lot of it is about the open ocean coasts. And there are lots of shorelines that are at threat and shorelines that are really important in interior bays, in estuaries that are changing, that we need to understand. And many of those are much closer to high population areas, particularly to disadvantaged communities necessarily than those on the beachfront. So mapping erosion hazard areas, doesn't sound like, it sounds like a pretty, it doesn't sound particularly exciting, but this is a really pivotal one, I think. And obviously I'm a scientist here, but it's a really pivotal one in making sure that people can be better prepared for what's coming. And then the last recommendation is about using new approaches. And you'll notice here how the recommendation there is phrased about in terms of reducing barriers to shoreline management, to use of resilient shoreline management processes, trying to advance the use of natural and nature-based features. We use that terminology in the report. As you know, that's the terminology for nature-based solutions in general that the Corps of Engineers has adopted, which is great. If the Corps of Engineers is going to adopt that term, I'm happy to use it in talking to them. But talking about what some of those barriers are, there may be regulatory barriers, there may be barriers of lack of information or lack of understanding or lack of guidance. And so we talk here not just about natural and nature-based features, but also about managed retreat and how there's really a lack of coordination and guidance on approaches like that, which are going to become increasingly important in the future. And so the example that we have down here is people working across jurisdictional boundaries, developing incentives to think about increase the use of natural and nature-based features as part of regional plans, right? Reduce their barriers, especially on eroded interior tidal waters, right? Putting seagrass in along the open coast, putting some marsh plants down along the open coast. We all know that that's not going to be the solution there, but there are many interior shorelines where we can certainly make a difference on erosion and accretion with some of these tools. So that's my kind of, I hope that wasn't too long, but that's my kind of insight into the report. We really want you to download it and crack it open, right, Mariah? So last slide is yours.
Yeah, so you can reach out to us with any questions that you have at our NSMS email. And again, as Denise mentioned, we have the reports on our website that's shown here.
We'd be happy to take any questions if we have time.
Thank you, Denise. Thank you, Mariah. We have some questions in the room, and if you have a question online, just please raise your hand and somebody will tell me. Colleen.
Good morning. First, thank you for this document. I know our county is very excited. I'm from Pasco County. We have 40% of our shoreline is undeveloped, which is highly unusual in this region. We have a beautiful shoreline, but it's been neglected, and we have a lot of issues. We have 2 feet of water for about 2 miles out. that makes us extremely vulnerable to any kind of storm surge that's coming. We have nothing to stop the water. No barrier islands to speak of. They're all, we have one little one in Anclote South. We are getting ready to actually start some restoration and some water quality issues we have on our shorelines. And we put in the FDEP for a grant to study this exact issue on beneficial reuse of spoils. And we were denied because they said it was too innovative. And I almost fell out of my chair when I said, I've never heard those words together. What are you telling me, too innovative? Luckily, we have a brilliant kid that used to work for you all at the Army Corps that put in for this grant and understood the value of it. So first, I would just suggest that the silos that are happening between you and FDEP are immense because they don't understand. There's a disconnect in our state with what you all are doing and what we were trying to do. So I would love to have you partner with us and see if there's a way to study our shoreline and provide this beneficial reuse for our shoreline and help us get that study so that we can contribute to the science of beneficial reuse along our coast because we are so vulnerable. And I've downloaded this document already and read through it. And I just want to thank you for doing it. However you tell me whatever to do. I actually just sent a letter yesterday to DEP and invited them and invited handfuls and handfuls of our staff at our county to listen to your presentation today. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And it sounds like you have encountered exactly the kind of barrier that so many other people across the Gulf of Mexico have. And part of that, well, one of the issues we point to in the report, one of the issues that we discuss a lot is the idea that some people don't think that these kinds of solutions are going to be reliable in the long run, and we don't have enough data. But I think, I can say this, I don't actually work for the Corps of Engineers, Mariah might not say this, but many agencies are kind of risk averse. I don't think this is just the Corps of Engineers. And so, where are these viable solutions, and how can we identify the circumstances where these are something that really should be considered, and where are there circumstances where they shouldn't be considered? As I implied just now, I think from a technical standpoint, we know that there are areas, perhaps like yours, where you've got a really, really shallow coastal slope where we really might be able to get some wave protection from installing something like this versus something that's really exposed to ocean swells all the time. But thank you for that. Trying to overcome those barriers.
Thank you. Any other questions? Anne has a question.
So I just wanted to bring up that where shoreline solutions are being presented, it would be really helpful if the permitting was made so that past permits that have been approved could be considered, and then similar projects that come forward could be addressed on the fact that past permits have been permitted and proved successful. And that would allow the installation of these materials to move ahead on a more expedited basis. When it takes more than a year for the Army Corps of Engineers to review permit applications for living shoreline solutions, I think that that's a real detriment to getting them implemented.
Again, that's a great example of the kind of barrier that we were hearing about from lots of people. And I don't know if it makes much difference, but as there's more and more exposure to these by regulatory agency staff, then they may become more familiar with the circumstances where they can be appropriate. But it's going to take a while to kind of overcome, not just in the Corps of Engineers, but in other agencies the idea that we need to do something and that these are viable tools in some circumstances. So I know it's enormously frustrating on the ground, but these were very common kinds of issues that were coming up across the Gulf of Mexico.
Yeah, and I'll just add, I know there's a lot of recognition in the Corps of Engineers leadership of these challenges. So we're hearing from the top on nature-based solutions, beneficial reuse, a real push to try to see, how we can improve our own processes to make sure that these barriers don't continue on in the future. And we're hoping that these reports will really help shed light on that.
Thank you. Alana.
So I just wanted to call attention to how these will be ongoing discussions here with the APM in August. We plan on having a Natural Resources and Environmental Impact Review Committee meeting where the Army Corps will be presenting their study for the dredging of Tampa Bay. And so we can be discussing, beneficial use options. And then in the September full agency meeting, we're slated to have FDOT present on some of the erosion issues that we see here in Tampa Bay. And then hopefully we'll also be getting a presentation from the EPC on their recent rule revisions to facilitate the permitting of living shorelines. And then I also just want to do a quick shout out to the Resilient Shoreline Model Ordinance template that we released within the last year. And that's really a customizable template ordinance that would facilitate the implementation of nature-based solutions like living shorelines, hybrid shorelines. And it also establishes a minimum height for these tidal flood barriers too. So I hope that we can continue these conversations and that this is a topic of interest to everyone. It seems like it is. And so I think the APM is one of these really great regional groups where we have all these stakeholders that are so important to these topics, and so hopefully we can just keep on discussing them and coming up with some solutions.
Stephen has a question.
Yeah, thanks for, it looks like a really interesting report. I'm definitely gonna dig into it. I'm wondering if the report, or maybe there's an online tool or something where we can go in and drill down into the specifics of our region. Can we say, look at, for example, you mentioned Egmont Key, can we look at how you assess the different erosion factors or contributors to the erosion there, or the types of sediments that are there? Is that ability available to look at a specific region? Or could it be made available?
Yeah, there are a number of tools available from different agencies and nonprofit organizations that will allow you to zoom in. One of the things that some of our recommendations point to is to get something a little bit more coordinated, so that you don't have to click here and look at what sea level rise is going to do, and click here and see what erosion is, and click here and see something else. And so the idea that the data that we have, and we have a number of different agencies have different online tools, but the idea that we need to present this in a more coordinated fashion so that it is more readily available to communities is, there's a lot of that under that recommendation, which is called something like mapping high hazard areas, but really it's about bringing all the different data sets together so that we can, so communities can be more readily informed about not just what's going on now, but what the future might hold. So in the report, I don't know what chapter it is, but there's I don't know, just before the recommendations, there's a chapter that kind of talks through a number of ongoing Gulf-wide initiatives for collaboration, and many of those have those portals too. So hopefully you'll see something in there. But it is a problem that there are these kind of tools are released, on a relatively frequent basis. Now that ArcGIS Online is so useful and easy to get into, but there are just so many of them, and knowing where to look for what can be a bit of a challenge. I agree.
So you must have done something like that yourselves, gone through the different sites, downloaded that data.
Yeah, so we kind of see the experience the frustration of it, I think. Yeah, but not putting it together in a whole. That was beyond the purview of the study that we conducted. Mariah, do we have any initiatives to do that? Is the Corps got any initiatives in that direction? It's really an interagency thing, right? Rather than a single federal agency, probably.
It is, and it's, again, as you've pointed out, it's in our recommendations. So the hope is that we continue to communicate this as an issue to not just the Corps of Engineers leadership, but all the way up to Congress.
Thank you. Ed from Tampa Bay Estuary Program has a question.
Yeah, it's more just follow up to what Steve was saying, and maybe Mariah, you could touch on it, but there's also the South Atlantic Coastal Study that's sort of complementary to some of this shoreline management plan work. And there are specific examples. You could drill down to Florida, and there's a Tampa Bay section within the South Atlantic Coastal Study that the Corps just completed. And there's specific examples of some of the techniques that they reference probably in this more general reports of the Gulf.
Yeah, I know we have a lot of ongoing efforts right now within the Corps in various regions. Some are multiple regional assessments. So we did coordinate very closely with the South Atlantic Comprehensive Team and ensured that our reports were aligning, but we did have some variation and differences. So I know that report goes through a pretty fine detail of recommendations, and they had hundreds of recommendations, whereas Denise pointed out, we distilled our recommendations and had a number of potential actions underneath those overall umbrella. I think the hope is that each of these reports will kind of help focus on different areas that are continued issues.
Alana has a question.
So you mentioned the lack of high quality relevant data in a lot of these more bays and estuaries, and I was just wondering, I mean, hopefully the people here can answer this too. What is the state of data here in Tampa Bay? Do we have data about the shoreline characteristics and the different coastal processes? Is that mapped out really well, or is that a gap that we could maybe look into funding for?
I think there's a recent update of the environmental sensitivity inventory for shorelines within the state and specific for our region that's pretty recent. So I think we do have a fairly good GIS coverage. George might know a little bit about that as well.
Well, we're working on it. FWC is working on it, and it's going forward pretty well, I think.
So yeah, I think
mean,
we do have
it's
some
good.
assets.
It's good coverage. I mean, there's a bunch of data. Steve's got tons of this data. Bob Weisberg has the offshore stuff, and the problem is when you look at these overall pictures, you get a nice broad brush, and it's like looking at a mural from across the street. When what we're trying to do here particularly is actually focus down on what's happening, off of Newport Richey or off of Hudson, that they, as a local government, can actually use to help improve their resiliency moving into the future. And I do think that based on what I've seen over time, Tampa Bay does have a strong leg forward in all of those issues.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for the presentation. I know that there was some comments about the link not working, at least the one that was posted there, but be assured that if you don't have access to the full report, it will be included in the minutes so you can share it with your agencies and folks as well. Thank you. Next
I
on
will
this.
provide a link in the chat then. See if that one will work.
A link in the chat as well. I'm not sure if that's the one that that there was a comment. Oh, there's probably an answer to that. So the minutes will definitely have a working link. Thank you all for the presentation. Next, we'll have a roundtable discussion on current issues and initiatives, anything that your agencies are working on or any hot topics that are facing your agencies. I invite you to let us know about, either online or in person here.
You start.
Yeah, let's kick it off.
So this Saturday, we do have a Give a Day for the Bay event down at Bishop Harbor, clean up at Mariposa Key. It's celebrating World Oceans Day as well. So if you have a kayak, paddleboard, come down. Reach out to our website to register for the event. I still believe there's some openings. It's basically a paddle out to some of the islands, clean up event there, and that's this Saturday. So go to tbep.org and then scroll down to the calendar for that particular event. I think there were some past discussions, talking about some of the water quality and seagrass loss issues that we've been having in the Bay. Part of the nitrogen management consortium, we're intending to go out for an RFP for work looking at developing potentially new restoration goals for that Bay segment as it relates to maintaining water quality that'd be supportive of maintaining seagrasses on a more permanent basis in that Bay segment. We know that we have issues with pyridinium blooms and, like I said, fairly significant seagrass loss in the whole Tampa Bay segment. So we're actually going to be developing a new similar capacity assessment, and I think Chair Todd expressed an interest of bringing back some of those results to this committee in the future, but we're just kicking that off this summer.
Thank you, Tom.
Yeah, we continue to focus, even though the use for reclaimed water for drinking water purposes is currently off the table. Our stakeholder groups, Sierra Club, Friends of the River, and League of Women Voters continue to focus on Senate Bill 64, which mandates a beneficial use of reclaimed water, of wastewater. And the danger remains for storage in the aquifer with potential pollution by PFAS, the potential of polluting our rivers by using reclaimed water, treated, albeit, for minimum flow, et cetera. And those are the projects that we continue to focus on. We need to find a solution as to a definition for beneficial use on Senate Bill 64 and potentially amend that legislation.
Thank you. David.
David Dale, National Fisheries Service. Got a couple things going on. Our highly migratory species branch has released a draft 5-year review of their essential fish habitat designations. So that's out for public comment right now. It was released, I believe, May 22nd, and that should be out for at least a 45-day, if not 60-day public comment. Also related, the Gulf of Mexico Fishery Management Council is in the process of updating their essential fish habitat identifications and descriptions. That will be a multi-year effort. It's already been a multi-year effort. But that's ongoing. Also, NOAA is trying to dispel misinformation about the essential fish habitat designation of sargassum, pending the influx of sargassum coming to the Gulf of Mexico. And we are often wrongly blamed for not allowing nuisance sargassum to be removed from beaches and that which threats water intakes for both power plants and desalination plants. So that's something that's ongoing with us right now. And also since I'm wearing the NOAA logo, we're 8 days into the hurricane season. Be ready.
Thank you.
So I just wanted to say that the Florida Birding and Nature Festival is going to be in October, the 12th through the 15th, and registration is online. People are signing up for their favorite field trips and talks. We have 18 talks, 30 field trips, and a nature expo that will be free and open to the public. It's going to be held at the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission's Suncoast Youth Conservation Center in Apollo Beach, just south of the Manatee Viewing Center. And it's a great opportunity for us to share information about the importance biologically of our region and its usefulness in terms of ecotourism and why it's important to have habitats for birds and wildlife across the region.
Great, any other comments or ideas for collaboration among the different groups that are here? We'll move on to announcements. If anybody has any announcements outside of what was just discussed, feel free to let us know. Seeing none, I'll ask if anybody, oh, you have something online? It looks like Amelia may have some comments.
Yeah, hi, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Hi, so my name's Amelia. I am a biologist with the FWC. And I was asked to just kind of give up a little update on where red tide is at currently. So FWC works with different academic groups, state, federal, and other partners to kind of get data and track the forecast for different blooms and kind of figure out what potential impacts there are. They go out and they test the water every single day, but I think about once a week, they will update our website and kind of give an explanation of like what's going on. So the most recent samples were from June 2nd. Red tide was detected in one sample along the southwest coast of Florida. I believe it was in Lee County, but none of the samples were above background levels. And then they didn't observe anything throughout Northwest or the East Coast of Florida. So if you guys want, there's a map I can send into the group chat. It just kind of updates every week and tells you like the latest status on red tide.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
It looks like Nick Fletcher from Tampa Electric has just jumped on as well.
Yeah, we were asked to talk about the pipeline expansion project over, I think it's called the Tampa West Pipeline. And basically Tampa Electric's working with a company called Florida Gas Transmission, or FGT, to increase pipeline pressure over to McDill, required to run some new reciprocating internal combustion engine units, or RICE units. Basically, these units are better able to respond to the quick fluctuations in power generation that solar places on the grid. And they're more efficient than standard aeroderivative engines and produce less air emissions than a simple cycle combustion turbine. So they're a bit better in a few ways. Then the power generated there will also experience less energy loss across the grid, since it'll be closer to the South Tampa area. And that pipeline, they're essentially expanding 1.25 miles of the pipeline, where an additional 8-inch line will be piped in. The increase is not related to the Big Bend modernization or any other existing Tampa Electric power plants, and there will be no change to the daily capacity of FGT's mainline system. So if anyone has any questions, please let me know.
Thank you. Any questions for Nick? All right. Thank you for the update. So I'll ask if anybody has any ideas for base soundings, articles, anything that's upcoming. We'll probably talk a little bit about that October event that Ann just mentioned in that Base Soundings magazine, perhaps.
Can I ask one more thing before we go to that? Yeah. I don't know if this is, I know FDOT has presented on the Gandy PD&E study in the past at this forum. And I know there's a lot of ongoing work going on the causeway that I'm not totally privy on what's going on and what their long-term plans and how that fits into the PD&E. So you mentioned that they're going to be presenting at an upcoming ABM, but be kind of interested to hear what they're doing and how that fits into the bridge replacement project that they're on. Stacy, do you have any info on?
I'll certainly ask.
There's a pipeline that looks like it's bringing in sediment for some areas of that causeway.
Thank you.
Sorry, I have 2 minutes.
Please, yes.
So we are accepting applications for FY24 Stormwater Outreach and Education Funding Opportunity. FDOT every year gives us about $90,000 to distribute as like mini grants, and it funds stormwater educational materials like signage, truck wraps, door hangers, any kind of materials that help spread the word on what stormwater is and how we can improve the quality of stormwater going into our precious water resources. And so the individual award ceiling is $15,000. The projects must be in Pinellas, Pasco, or Hillsborough, and applications are due on July 13th to me. So you can visit our website, tprpc.org/stormwater, and that'll take you to our committee page. You just scroll down and you'll see the funding opportunity. And then I was also asked to give an update on the USF Special Collections is digitizing Skip Gandy's aerial photography collection of more than 100,000 photos from around the Tampa Bay region. That's a really valuable visual resource chronicling several decades of growth, decline, and revitalization in and around Tampa Bay. And I will have that fundraising site on the follow-up email that I send out with the meeting minutes. So if you are interested in helping to fund those digitalization efforts, then feel free to contribute to. Thanks.
Thank you. Anything else to add? The next meeting will be the Natural Resources Environmental Impact Review Committee, which will be meeting in August. We'll review the draft report associated with the Tampa Harbor Deepening Study, as was mentioned earlier. And then we have a full agency meeting in September. So unless there's anything further, hope to see you all at one of the meeting is adjourned.